My friends and I had been going to Sunny Hills Amusement Park for years. It was one of those classic parks, with creaky old rides, fun houses that hadn't been updated in decades, and cotton candy so sweet it could rot your teeth on the spot. But that was the charm of it, nostalgic, innocent, familiar. Or so we thought. Every year, they added something new to keep people coming back, usually some cheesy attraction or a roller coaster with one extra loop. But this year was different. There were rumors about a new ride that had been quietly built in a section of the park that was normally closed off to the public. No big announcement, no flashy grand opening, just whispers about it among the staff and some regulars who swore they saw something strange behind the construction fences. It was called the Forgotten Funhouse. The moment we saw it, we knew something was wrong. The entrance was hidden at the back of the park, far from the bright lights and cheerful music. The sign was old, faded, like it had been there for decades but only just revealed. It was one of those old-timey carnival facades, with creepy clown faces painted on rotting wood. Their eyes were too realistic, almost as if they were following you as you approached. No one else seemed to notice it. There were no lines, no signs pointing to it, just the five of us standing in front of the decaying entrance, feeling the chill of the evening air settle into our bones. "Should we go in?" Emily, the most adventurous of us, asked with a grin. Of course, we all agreed. That's what we did every year, seek out the weirdest, scariest ride and see if we could make it through without screaming. The interior was pitch black when we entered, with just enough light to see the warped mirrors lining the walls. They distorted our reflections into grotesque, unnatural shapes, elongated limbs, swollen heads, bulging eyes. At first, it was fun, laughing at how ridiculous we looked, but as we moved deeper into the funhouse, the laughter faded. The mirrors started to shift on their own, reflecting things that shouldn't have been there. At first, it was subtle, a shadow darting in the corner, a flicker of movement that vanished when you turned to look. But then the reflection started to show us things that weren't in the room at all. I saw myself standing in the reflection, but my reflection wasn't copying my movements. It was standing perfectly still, staring at me with wide, hollow eyes. My smile froze, and I backed away, trying to catch up to the others. "Guys, wait!" I called, but when I turned the corner, they were gone. I stood there, surrounded by mirrors, every reflection showing me something different. One version of me had blood trickling down my face, eyes gouged out. Another was grinning maniacally, lips split into a wide, unnatural smile. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. "Turn around," a voice whispered. I didn't. I couldn't. I ran forward, crashing into the mirrors, hoping to find my friends. The narrow halls twisted and turned, disorienting me. Every step I took felt like I was being watched, like something was following me, its presence growing closer with every heartbeat. Finally, I found an exit, a large wooden door with a rusted handle. I threw it open and stumbled into a room that was eerily quiet. It wasn't a part of the funhouse anymore. This was something else, something older. The walls were covered in tattered carnival posters from the 1920s, advertising sideshow freaks and oddities beyond your wildest nightmares. In the center of the room was a carousel, its wooden horses frozen mid-gallop. Except, they weren't just wooden. The closer I got, the more I noticed the details. The horses' eyes were too real, the hair on their tails looked too natural, like it had been harvested. And then I saw their faces. Twisted, tormented expressions, eyes wide in terror, mouths open in silent screams. But they weren't horses. They were people. Or at least they had been. The ride creaked to life, slowly turning, the faces of the trapped souls spinning round and round, their eyes following me as I backed away in horror. That's when I saw my friends. They were there, standing at the edges of the room, staring blankly at the carousel. Emily, Chris, Jordan, and Beth, they were all there, but they didn't look right. Their faces were pale, their eyes glassy, like dolls or mannequins. "Guys?" I whispered, my voice trembling. They didn't respond. They just stared. I ran to Emily, grabbing her arm, but it was cold, stiff, like she had been frozen. Her head slowly turned towards me, her lips moving ever so slightly. "You shouldn't have come here," she rasped, her voice distorted, like it was coming from deep within her throat. "Now you'll never leave." I backed away, the carousel spinning faster behind me, the faces of the trapped riders becoming a blur. The room was closing in, the walls pressing closer, suffocating me. I had to get out. I had to escape before a hand grabbed my shoulder. I turned to see a face, but it wasn't my friend's. It wasn't even human. Its eyes were empty sockets, its skin rotting and sagging, a twisted grin stretched across its decaying face. "We've been waiting for you," it hissed. The last thing I heard before everything went black was the sound of carnival music, slow and distorted, playing a tune that would haunt me forever. I woke up outside the funhouse, alone. The park was deserted, not a soul in sight. The sun was rising, casting long shadows over the empty rides. My friends were gone, their names erased from the park's records as if they had never existed. But I know the truth. They're still there, inside the forgotten funhouse, trapped forever in that nightmarish carnival, waiting for the next group of fools to wander in. And I can still hear the music. I don't know how I made it home that night. One moment, I was stumbling out of the forgotten funhouse, dazed and terrified, and the next, I was lying in my bed, staring at the ceiling. My clothes were still damp with sweat, and my hands trembled as I tried to convince myself it had all been a bad dream. But deep down, I knew better. My friends were gone, and there was no record of them ever having existed. I checked their social media, our group chat, even the photos on my phone. Nothing. All the pictures we had taken together at Sunny Hills over the years were missing, as if the park itself had erased every trace of them. But I remembered. I remembered them. I could still see Emily's excited grin, Chris and Jordan arguing over which ride to go on next, Beth's sarcastic jokes. They were real, and now they were trapped in that horrifying place. I couldn't let it end like that. I had to go back. The next day, I drove to the park. It felt different, quieter. It was early in the morning, and the usual buzz of excitement, the chatter of families and the laughter of children, was absent. The gates stood open, but no one seemed to be entering. It was as if the place had been forgotten by the world. As I walked through the entrance, the bright colors of the park seemed muted, and the air was heavy, thick with a tension I hadn't noticed before. My eyes darted around, half expecting to see one of my friends, hoping maybe, just maybe, they had escaped too, but I saw no one. Not a single soul. I made my way to the back of the park, where the forgotten funhouse had been. The path looked different, more overgrown, like the area had been abandoned for years, even though I knew it had only been a day since I was last there. When I reached the spot where the funhouse had stood, my heart dropped. It was gone. The twisted, decaying entrance had vanished. In its place was an old, dilapidated building, boarded up with rotting planks and overgrown with vines. It looked as though no one had set foot near it in decades. I stood there, staring at the empty lot, my mind racing. Had I imagined it all? Was the funhouse some kind of hallucination brought on by exhaustion or fear? But no, I knew what I had seen. I knew what had happened. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. Movement in one of the broken windows of the building. A flicker, like a shadow darting across the glass. My heart raced. Could it be one of them? One of my friends? I approached cautiously, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. The window was shattered, and through the cracks, I could see something moving inside. I leaned closer, trying to get a better look. "Emily?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. And no response. I took a deep breath and climbed through the broken window, the glass crunching beneath my feet. The interior was dark, musty, and cold. The walls were covered in faded posters from long-forgotten carnivals, peeling and torn. The air felt thick, heavy with the stench of decay. As I stepped deeper into the building, I heard a sound, a soft, shuffling noise, like something moving just out of sight. I followed it, my heart pounding in my chest. "Emily? Chris? Beth?" I called, my voice trembling. "Please, if you're here." The shuffling stopped, and for a moment, there was only silence. Then, from the shadows, I heard a voice. "Why did you come back?" It was Emily's voice, but it sounded wrong, distant, hollow, like an echo of something that had been alive but wasn't anymore. I spun around, searching for her, but all I saw were shadows. "Emily!" I shouted, panic rising in my throat. "Where are you?" "Don't look for us," her voice whispered, closer this time. "You can't save us. You need to leave, before it's too late." Before I could respond, the room shifted. The walls seemed to close in, twisting and warping, just like in the funhouse. Mirrors began to appear on the walls, each one reflecting not my image, but the twisted versions of my friends. Their faces were distorted, their eyes lifeless, mouths frozen in silent screams. I backed away, but the mirrors surrounded me, trapping me in a maze of warped reflections. Each step I took, their reflections grew more grotesque, more horrifying. I could hear them whispering, their voices overlapping, begging me to leave, to run before I met the same fate. Suddenly, one of the mirrors shattered, the glass raining down around me. I shielded my face, and when I looked up, I saw her. Emily stood in the center of the room, but it wasn't really her. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were wide, empty sockets. Her mouth hung open, but instead of words, only a low, guttural moan escaped. Behind her, I saw Chris, Jordan, and Beth. They were all there, twisted versions of themselves, their bodies contorted in unnatural ways. Their faces were frozen in expressions of terror, and their eyes were hollow, black voids that seemed to swallow the light. I screamed, stumbling backward, but the door had vanished. I was trapped. "They're waiting for you," Emily rasped, her voice like nails on a chalkboard. "You belong here now." I felt a cold hand grasp my arm, and I turned to see Chris standing next to me, his face inches from mine. His lips moved, but no sound came out. His skin was cold, dead. I tore myself away, running blindly through the darkened halls, the laughter of the carousel echoing in my ears. I could hear the distorted carnival music playing, that same haunting tune that had followed me out of the funhouse before. It was everywhere now, filling my head, drowning out my thoughts. I was losing my mind. I was going to end up just like them, trapped, forgotten. But then, just as I was about to give up, I saw it, a door, faintly glowing at the end of the hall. I ran towards it, my heart pounding, my breath ragged. As I reached it, I threw it open and stumbled out into the daylight. I was back in the park. The sun was shining, the rides were operating, and people were laughing, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. I looked down at my hands, trembling. They were cold, too cold. And then I saw it, the faint, ghostly reflection of myself in a nearby window. My eyes were empty. The reflection in the window held me captive. My eyes, they were hollow. Dark, bottomless pits, just like the faces of my friends that I had seen in the funhouse. I stumbled back, my heart racing, barely able to breathe. The normal sounds of the amusement park felt distant, muffled, like I was hearing them through a thick fog. Something was wrong, very wrong. I wasn't alone. My mind raced as I desperately tried to remember how I got back outside. But the memories were fragmented, disjointed. One moment I was running through that twisted nightmare, and the next I was here. But the faces, the whispers, they lingered, haunting the edges of my mind. And my hands, they were still cold, deathly cold. People passed by me, laughing and enjoying their day, completely unaware of the terror that lurked behind the funhouse. I wanted to scream at them, to tell them to leave, to run, but something kept me silent. My throat felt tight, like something was holding me back, preventing me from speaking. I took a deep breath and forced myself to move, stumbling through the park, trying to make sense of what had happened. The sunlight felt harsh against my skin, almost burning, and the colors of the park seemed too bright, too sharp. Everything was wrong. The carousel music that once sounded cheerful now echoed faintly in my ears, slow and distorted, a constant reminder of the nightmare that still clung to me. I needed answers. I couldn't just leave. My friends were still trapped inside, and even though I had escaped, I wasn't really free. That funhouse, that thing had taken something from me, and I could feel it pulling me back. That night, I returned home, but sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, Emily, Chris, Jordan, Beth, all of them standing in that curse room, their hollow eyes staring back at me. Their voices whispered in my head, begging me to return. You belong here. The next morning, I woke up with a single, chilling thought. I needed to go back. Not just to the park, but to the funhouse itself. The idea terrified me, but I couldn't ignore it. Something was drawing me there, like an invisible hand pulling me deeper into the darkness. I couldn't let it win, but I also knew I couldn't fight it alone. I spent the day researching Sunny Hills Amusement Park, desperate to find anything that could explain what had happened. At first, all I found were the usual articles, stories about the park's history, photos of families enjoying the rides, tales of renovations and new attractions. But then, buried deep in the archives of a local forum, I found something that made my blood run cold. There had been disappearances at Sunny Hills before. In the 1970s, several guests had vanished without a trace. They had all been last seen entering a funhouse that had been built in the same area where I had found the forgotten funhouse. Back then, it was called the Spectral Maze, a popular attraction that boasted illusions and tricks meant to terrify guests. But according to witnesses, some people who went inside never came out. The park had covered up the disappearances, blaming them on accidents or lost visitors wandering away. Eventually, the funhouse was closed and dismantled, or so they claimed. But what if it hadn't been dismantled? What if it had been waiting, buried under years of new rides and attractions, slowly rotting, feeding off the fear and souls of those who dared enter? I knew I couldn't do this alone, so I reached out to the only person who might believe me, my cousin, Dave. He had always been into the paranormal, investigating abandoned places and digging up urban legends. If anyone could help me, it was him. That night, Dave and I met at the park after hours. I explained everything, about the funhouse, my missing friends, the horrors I had seen. To my relief, he didn't think I was crazy. In fact, he seemed intrigued. This place has a reputation, Dave said as we made our way to the back of the park. I've heard stories about Sunny Hills for years. Ghost sightings, weird electrical disturbances, unexplained accidents. But a haunted funhouse? That's something else. When we reached the area where the forgotten funhouse had stood, my heart sank. Once again, the building was gone. The overgrown lot where it had been was just as empty as before, a patch of land that didn't belong to the rest of the park. It was here, I whispered, feeling a wave of hopelessness wash over me. Dave examined the area, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. It's still here, he muttered, more to himself than to me. You don't just erase something like this. It's hiding. Hiding? I asked, my voice trembling. How can a funhouse just hide? Before Dave could answer, the air around us grew cold, unnaturally cold, like stepping into a freezer. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I felt that same pull I had felt before, the same invisible hand drawing me toward the darkness. Then, without warning, a door appeared. It wasn't like before, with the rotting wooden facade and clown faces. No, this door was old, simple, and made of rusted metal. It had no sign, no markings, but I knew this was it. This was the entrance to whatever twisted dimension had taken my friends. Dave's eyes widened as he saw the door materialize out of thin air. Holy! You weren't kidding, he whispered. I told you, I said, my voice shaking. It's real. He glanced at me, his expression serious. Are you sure you want to do this? I hesitated for only a moment, then nodded. I have to. I can't leave them in there. Without another word, we approached the door. As we got closer, the air grew thicker, like we were walking through a veil between two worlds. My hands were trembling, but I forced myself to reach out and grab the handle. It was cold, ice cold, and the moment I touched it, I heard them again, my friends' voices, faint but unmistakable. We're waiting. I turned the handle, and the door creaked open, revealing only darkness beyond. I swallowed hard, took a deep breath, and stepped through, Dave close behind me. The moment we entered, the door slammed shut, plunging us into pitch-black silence. The only sound was our breathing, shallow and ragged, echoing in the void. The walls around us felt close, suffocating, But as our eyes adjusted to the darkness, we realized we weren't in a hallway. We were in a room filled with mirrors. Just like before, the mirrors distorted our reflections, twisting them into grotesque, unnatural shapes. But this time, something was different. The reflections weren't just warped, they were moving on their own. In one mirror, I saw myself, but my reflection wasn't following my movements. Instead, it stood still, staring at me with a wide, twisted grin. Behind it, the shadows shifted, and I saw them, Emily, Chris, Jordan, and Beth, standing just out of sight, watching. "They're here," I whispered. Dave nodded, his eyes wide. "Yeah, but so is something else." I turned to ask what he meant, but before I could, the mirrors began to crack. One by one, the glass shattered, and through the broken shards I saw it, a figure, dark and twisted, with eyes like voids and a grin that stretched far too wide. It was coming for us, and this time, I knew we might not escape. The sound of shattering glass filled the room, each mirror splintering into thousands of jagged pieces. The reflections warped and twisted as the dark figure stepped through the shards. Its grin was impossibly wide, stretching across its pale, featureless face. Its eyes, if they could even be called that, were bottomless pits of darkness, drawing in the dim light around us. Dave and I stood frozen, paralyzed by the thing that had crawled out of the broken mirrors. Its body was long and gaunt, limbs too thin and elongated to be human, its skin stretched tight over skeletal features. It moved with an unnatural grace, its long fingers twitching as if eager to grab hold of us. My heart pounded in my chest as I struggled to breathe, panic gripping me. Dave gripped my arm, his voice barely a whisper. "We need to move! Now star dot." I nodded, snapping out of my daze, and we bolted for the door at the far end of the room. The funhouse had twisted itself again, shifting from a maze of mirrors into a narrow corridor that seemed to stretch forever. Behind us, I could hear the scraping of claws on the ground, the sound of the creature moving far faster than it should have been able to. "This way!" I shouted, pulling Dave forward. The hallway was lined with cracked funhouse mirrors, each one showing twisted, nightmarish versions of ourselves. Some reflected us screaming in terror, others displayed our bodies mangled and bloodied, lifeless on the ground. But the worst part wasn't the mirrors, it was the whispers. "You can't leave. You belong here. We're waiting for you." The voices of my friends echoed from the walls, growing louder with every step we took. It was as if the funhouse itself was alive, feeding off our fear, trapping us deeper in its twisted game. The air grew colder, the light dimmer, until we were running in near total darkness. I could hear the creature gaining on us, its raspy breathing and the wet sound of its feet slapping against the ground. I glanced back and instantly regretted it. It was closer now, its grin wider, eyes locked onto me like it was savoring the chase. Up ahead, a faint light flickered, a door. Another exit. I didn't care where it led, as long as it got us away from that thing. Dave and I sprinted toward it, every muscle in my body screaming from fear and exhaustion. We reached the door, and without hesitation, I threw it open. But what lay beyond wasn't an exit, it was something worse. We stumbled into a vast, dimly lit room. At first glance, it looked like a normal carnival attraction, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized where we were. The carousel. The same one I had seen before, where the wooden horses were trapped in a grotesque, eternal gallop. But this time, the figures weren't just horses, they were people. Twisted, misshapen forms, some frozen mid-scream, others with expressions of pure terror etched into their faces. The carousel slowly turned, creaking with each rotation, and I realized with horror that the figures weren't just carved statues, they were real. The people trapped on the carousel had once been alive, just like my friends. Dave froze beside me, his eyes wide with terror. "What the hell is this?" he whispered, his voice shaky. I didn't have time to answer. Behind us, the door slammed shut, sealing us inside. The creature had followed us, its distorted form looming in the shadows. It moved closer, its eyes fixed on the carousel. I could hear the faint, distorted carnival music starting to play again, slow and haunting, as the carousel began to spin faster. Look, Dave whispered, pointing to the carousel. Do you see that? I followed his gaze, my heart sinking as I realized what he meant. Among the twisted figures on the ride, I saw them. Emily, Chris, Jordan, Beth, each one strapped to one of the carousel's grotesque horses, their faces frozen in expressions of agony. No, I breathed, stepping forward. My mind raced with disbelief. They were here, trapped, just like I had feared. Emily's head was tilted back, her mouth open in a silent scream, her eyes wide with terror. Chris was twisted unnaturally, his arms bent at impossible angles as if he had been fighting to free himself. Jordan and Beth were similarly contorted, their bodies molded into the twisted wood of the carousel, as if they had become part of the ride itself. We have to get them off, I said, my voice shaking with desperation. We have to help them. Dave grabbed my arm, pulling me back. We can't. Don't you see? They're part of it now. This place, it's not just some haunted funhouse. It feeds on people, traps them in its rides. If we try to free them, we might end up just like them. I stared at my friends, my heart breaking. I couldn't just leave them like this. But Dave was right. This place had claimed them, and if we weren't careful, it would claim us too. Before I could respond, the creature stepped out of the shadows, its grin widening as it approached the carousel. Its gaze shifted from us to the trapped souls on the ride, and for a moment, I saw something horrifying in its hollow eyes. Satisfaction. It wasn't just hunting us. It was enjoying this. The carousel spun faster, the music growing louder, more chaotic. The figures on the ride seemed to writhe, their faces contorting as if they were trying to break free but couldn't. I could feel the pull again, that invisible force drawing me toward the ride, urging me to join them. No! I shouted, fighting against the urge to move. But the pull was growing stronger, and the creature was getting closer. Dave grabbed my arm, his face pale with fear. We have to get out of here. Now. I nodded, my mind racing. There had to be a way out, a way to break the cycle, to escape this nightmare. I glanced around the room, searching for anything, any sign of an exit, a weakness in the funhouse's twisted logic. And then I saw a small, rusted door, half hidden behind the machinery that powered the carousel. It was barely noticeable, but something about it felt different, out of place, like it didn't belong in this nightmare. It was our only chance. There! I shouted, pointing to the door. Dave and I bolted toward it, the creature's rasping breath growing louder behind us. As we reached the door, I yanked it open, and we tumbled through, slamming it shut behind us. The creature let out a deafening scream, the sound of its frustration echoing through the walls. But we didn't stop. We kept running, through narrow hallways that twisted and turned, the air growing colder and more oppressive with each step. The funhouse was collapsing around us, the walls warping, the mirrors shattering, the carnival music distorting into a horrifying cacophony. We had to be close. We had to be. Finally, we burst through another door, and into the night air. We were outside. The park was still and quiet, the rides lifeless, the bright colors faded in the moonlight. I collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath, my body trembling from exhaustion and fear. Dave stood beside me, his eyes wide, his face pale. We made it, he whispered, disbelief in his voice. I nodded, but deep down, I knew it wasn't over. The park might have let us go, but it hadn't let us win. My friends were still inside, trapped on that cursed carousel, and I could feel the funhouse watching, waiting. As we staggered away from Sunny Hills, the faint sound of carnival music followed us, drifting through the night air. It was slow, haunting, like a reminder of what we had left behind. And then, just before we reached the parking lot, I heard a whisper. We're still here. I froze, my blood turning to ice. I looked back toward the park, but all I saw was darkness. The funhouse wasn't done with us. It never would be. The whisper echoed in my mind long after we had left the park. We're still here. The chilling words clung to me like a dark cloud, following me even as we pulled away from the shadow of Sunny Hills Amusement Park. I glanced back through the car window. half expecting to see the twisted silhouette of the carousel spinning in the distance. But the park was quiet, its bright lights long extinguished, as though the horror we had faced had never happened. But I knew better. I felt better. Sunny Hills wasn't done with us, and the thing inside that funhouse had let us leave for one reason: it wanted us to come back. For the next few days, I tried to return to a normal routine, but everything felt wrong. My house didn't feel like home anymore. Every room seemed too quiet, too empty. I'd catch glimpses of movement in the corner of my vision, dark shapes just out of sight, always vanishing when I turned to look. Worse, the reflection in the mirror had begun to change again. At first, it was subtle, just a strange shadow behind me, or a flash of a hollow eye in my reflection. But over time, the presence in the mirror grew more insistent, and then the nightmares started. Every night, I was back in that cursed funhouse. The distorted faces of my friends leered at me from the mirrors, their screams muffled by the eerie carnival music. The carousel spun endlessly in the background, the grotesque figures of Emily, Chris, Jordan, and Beth trapped in their eternal ride. But worst of all was the figure with the wide grin and hollow eyes. It was always there, lurking just out of reach, watching me, waiting for me to return. Sleep offered no escape. If anything, it pulled me deeper into the park's grass. One morning, I woke up with something cold and hard in my hand. I gasped, bolting upright in bed. Clutched in my palm was a small, rusted ticket, one of the old ride tickets from Sunny Hills. My heart raced as I turned it over, staring at the faded text that was barely legible. ***, admit 1, the forgotten funhouse. ***, my pulse quickened. I hadn't taken anything from the park. This ticket shouldn't be here. But it was. And that meant only one thing. The park was calling me back. I tried to resist. I really did. I buried the ticket in the bottom drawer of my desk, refusing to look at it, hoping that ignoring it would somehow break the park's hold over me. But each day, the pull grew stronger. The whispers started again, faint at first, but growing louder as the days passed. Come back, they're waiting. ***. You're not done. ***. I couldn't take it anymore. I called Dave, hoping he would understand. It's happening again, I said, trying to keep the panic from seeping into my voice. The park, it's still here. It's inside me. I keep seeing things, hearing things. I even found a ticket. Dave was silent on the other end for a long moment before he finally spoke. I know what you're talking about, he said, his voice low and strained. I've been hearing them too. The whispers, they won't stop. And last night I saw something in the mirror. It wasn't me. It was twisted, like the reflections from the funhouse. A chill ran down my spine. We both knew what it meant. We hadn't escaped. The funhouse had its hooks in us, and it wasn't letting go. We have to go back, I whispered, my voice trembling. We have to end this. For real this time. Dave hesitated. If we go back, there's no guarantee we'll make it out again. You saw what that thing was. It's not just a haunted attraction. It's something else, something alive. It wants us, and it wants them. I know, I said, swallowing hard. But I can't live like this. We have to try. That night, we returned to Sunny Hills. The amusement park was closed, the gates locked, but we knew a way in. We slipped through a gap in the fence at the far end of the park, the same spot we had used as kids to sneak in after hours. Except this time, the thrill of rebellion was replaced with a cold sense of dread. The park was eerily quiet, the once vibrant rides now looming in the darkness like forgotten relics. The lights along the walkways flickered weakly, casting long, distorted shadows across the ground. The wind whispered through the empty booths and stalls, carrying with it faint traces of the carousel's haunting melody. Do you hear that? Dave asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. The music was faint, but unmistakable. It was the same slow, distorted tune we had heard the night we first discovered the forgotten funhouse. We followed the sound, our footsteps echoing unnaturally loud in the stillness. The park seemed to stretch and twist as we walked, every corner familiar yet strange, as though the very layout of the place was shifting around us. Finally, we reached it, the funhouse. The once crumbling facade now stood tall and whole, as if it had never decayed at all. The garish clown faces grinned down at us, their eyes glittering with malice, and the door, now pristine, stood wide open, beckoning us inside. "We don't have to do this," Dave said, his voice shaky, but I knew we did. We couldn't run from it anymore. If we didn't stop this now, we'd never be freed. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The moment we crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind us, and the world shifted. We were no longer in the familiar, rundown funhouse. This place was alive, pulsing with a dark, twisted energy. The walls writhed and shifted like living things, and the air was thick with the scent of decay and rot. The mirrors were back, but this time, there were no reflections. Only darkness. Endless, suffocating darkness. "They're waiting," I whispered, more to myself than to Dave. We moved deeper into the funhouse, each step taking us further from reality and closer to the heart of the nightmare. The whispers grew louder, the walls closing in around us. I could feel it watching us, the same presence that had stalked us before. It was here, somewhere in the dark, waiting for the right moment to strike. Finally, we reached the central room, the same room with the carousel, now spinning faster than before. The twisted figures were still there, but they were moving now, their faces contorted in pain as they were forced to ride the endless loop. And there they were, ***, Emily, Chris, Jordan, Beth ***, trapped on the ride, their faces locked in expressions of pure agony. Their bodies were twisted, melded with the horses, as if they were becoming part of the ride itself. "We have to stop it," I said, my voice trembling. "But how?" Dave asked, looking around frantically. "There's no way to destroy this place. It's not real, it's something else." I stared at the carousel, the relentless turning, the music that echoed in my mind. The funhouse wasn't just an attraction. It was a doorway, a trap. It fed on fear, on suffering. If we could break that cycle, maybe we could weaken it. "Help me!" I shouted to Dave. "We need to stop the carousel." We both ran toward the ride, our hands gripping the cold, rusted machinery that powered the endless spin. The creature with the hollow eyes and wide grin stepped out from the shadows, but this time, I didn't freeze. I felt a surge of determination, an anger that had been building since the day I lost my friends. With a shout, I yanked at the lever controlling the carousel. It screeched to a halt, the music grinding to an abrupt stop. The figures on the ride stopped moving, their twisted faces still locked in horror, but the hold on them seemed to loosen. For a brief, terrifying moment, the entire funhouse seemed to shake. The walls groaned, the mirrors cracked, and the air around us became unbearably thick. The creature let out a deafening scream, its body twisting and contorting as it was pulled back toward the shadows. And then, silence. The carousel stopped completely, the figures frozen in place. The funhouse no longer felt alive, no longer pulsing with that dark energy. It was over. Or at least I thought it was. I turned to Dave, ready to say something, but then I heard it again. Faint, but unmistakable. A whisper, ***, we're still here, ***. The whisper echoed through the still air like a ghostly breath. "We're still here." I felt it reverberate through my bones, chilling me to my core. Dave and I exchanged a look, his eyes wide with the same creeping dread that had gripped my heart. It was over, wasn't it? The funhouse had fallen silent, the carousel stopped, and the twisted forms of our friends were no longer writhing in agony. But the park itself was alive, and the whisper that had followed us from the moment we first set foot here lingered, as if mocking our efforts. "We have to leave," Dave said, his voice trembling. "We did what we could. There's nothing more we can do for them. We've stopped it." I wanted to believe him, to let myself hope that somehow, our friends were finally free. But deep down I knew. The funhouse might have been halted, but something far darker still held sway over this place. "We need to make sure," I said, my voice shaky but firm. "We can't leave them like this." Reluctantly, Dave nodded. Together, we approached the carousel. The figures, Emily, Chris, Jordan, and Beth, were no longer moving, no longer trapped in that horrifying loop of endless suffering. But their eyes were open, wide and staring, as if frozen in that final moment of terror. I stepped closer to Emily, reaching out cautiously, my hand trembling. I had to know. I had to see if she was still alive, still in there somehow. My fingers barely brushed against her cold skin when I felt it, a faint tremor beneath the surface. "Emily?" I whispered, my heart racing. Her lips parted ever so slightly, and for a brief moment I thought I saw her chest rise. But then a voice, hers, but not hers, whispered through cracked lips. "It's not over. You can't save us." I stumbled back, horrified, as her eyes, those hollow, lifeless eyes, locked onto mine. Behind me, I heard Dave gasp as he saw the same thing happening to Chris and the others. They were speaking, but the words weren't their own. Something else was inside them, using their voices, their bodies. "This isn't real," Dave muttered, his voice shaking. "This can't be real." But it was. The nightmare was far from over. The air around us grew heavy again, thick with the same oppressive energy that had gripped the funhouse earlier. The walls seemed to pulse, and the shadows stretched unnaturally long, creeping toward us like living things. The dark presence we had felt before, the thing that had been watching us, hunting us, was returning, and then we heard it. The sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing through the funhouse. "No," I whispered, backing away from the carousel. "It can't be." But it was. The creature, the thing with the wide grin and hollow eyes, was back. Its lanky, twisted form emerged from the shadows, its black eyes glinting in the dim light, and its grin somehow wider than before. It moved with a grotesque elegance, its long fingers twitching as it crept closer. "We have to run!" Dave shouted, grabbing my arm. But as we turned to flee, the mirrors along the walls began to shimmer, rippling like water. Reflections flickered in and out of existence, nightmarish versions of ourselves, twisted and distorted, leering at us with empty eyes. The funhouse was shifting again, twisting reality around us like it had before, trapping us in its maze. There was nowhere to go. The mirrors formed a labyrinth, the doors we had come through now gone, replaced with walls that seemed to stretch into infinity. The creature took another step forward, its grin never faltering. "You never left," it whispered, its voice a low, rasping growl. "You're part of this now. Just like them." It pointed one long, bony finger at the carousel, where our friends still sat, motionless, their eyes wide and blank. The creature's words sent a fresh wave of terror through me. "What do you want from us?" I shouted, my voice cracking with fear and anger. The creature tilted its head, as if amused by the question. "I want you to join them," it said, its voice oozing with malice. "You belong to the park now. You always have." "No!" I screamed. "We're not staying. We're getting out of here, and we're taking them with us." The creature's smile never faltered, but its eyes darkened, the hollow pits of its gaze boring into me. "You can't save them. They're already part of the funhouse. And soon you will be too." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my resolve waver, the overwhelming sense of hopelessness crushing down on me. Was the creature right? Had we been trapped from the beginning, doomed the moment we set foot inside the park? But then, something flickered in the back of my mind, something I had nearly forgotten. The ticket. I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the small, rusted ticket I had found that morning. I pulled it out, holding it up to the creature. "What about this?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "What does this mean?" The creature's grin faltered, just for a second, and I saw something in its dark eyes that I hadn't expected. Fear. "You shouldn't have that," it hissed, its voice low and venomous. The ticket seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, the faded words. "Admit 1, the forgotten funhouse," shimmering on its surface. I didn't understand why, but I knew this ticket was important. It was the key to something. "We can leave," I said, more to myself than to the creature. "This ticket, it's our way out." The creature's expression twisted into a snarl, its grin finally vanishing. "You think a piece of paper will save you?" it spat, advancing on us. This place is more than just a funhouse. It's alive. It will never let you leave. But I wasn't listening anymore. The ticket in my hand felt warm, pulsing with energy. I knew what I had to do. Dave, I said, my voice steadying. We need to get to the entrance. That's where the ticket works. It's our only chance. Dave nodded, though fear still lingered in his eyes. Let's go. We turned and ran, the mirrors shifting and warping around us. But I didn't let the disorienting reflections slow me down. I focused on the ticket, on the faint pulse of warmth in my hand. It was leading us, guiding us toward the exit. The creature's enraged scream echoed through the funhouse as it chased after us, its footsteps growing louder, faster. I could feel it closing in, the air growing colder with each step it took. But I didn't look back. I couldn't. I had to trust that the ticket would lead us out. Finally, we burst through the final hallway, the funhouse entrance looming ahead. The rusted door creaked open, revealing the night sky beyond. Freedom. I didn't hesitate. I held up the ticket, and as I stepped through the doorway, I felt a strange sensation, like passing through an invisible barrier. The oppressive weight that had been pressing down on me vanished, and for the first time since we'd entered the funhouse, I could breathe freely. Dave followed close behind, and together, we stumbled out into the open air, gasping for breath. The creature's scream echoed one last time behind us, but it didn't follow. It couldn't. The ticket had worked out, we had escaped. The park was silent, eerily still. The twisted carnival rides loomed in the distance, dark and lifeless once more. I glanced down at the ticket in my hand, now cold and faded, the once glowing text completely gone. We did it, Dave whispered, disbelief in his voice. We're free. But as I looked back at the funhouse, at the dark, yawning entrance that still seemed to call out to me, I wasn't so sure. The whispers had stopped, the pull had faded, but deep down, I knew the truth. The funhouse wasn't gone. It was waiting. And even though we had escaped, we hadn't defeated it, not really. We're free, I said softly, but the words felt hollow. As Dave and I walked away from Sunny Hills for the last time, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. The park had let us go, but it hadn't let us win, and somewhere, deep in the shadows of the funhouse, I knew it was still watching, waiting. Weeks passed. The nightmares faded, the whispers fell silent, and life began to return to normal, at least on the surface. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The funhouse had taken something from us that night, something we could never get back. One morning, as I was getting ready for work, I caught a glimpse of myself in the bathroom mirror. For a moment, everything seemed normal. But then, just as I was about to turn away, I saw it, a faint, flickering reflection that wasn't quite my own. A shadow, a grin, and a whisper, soft and chilling, echoed in my mind. We're still here. The whisper haunted me long after that morning. We're still here. Those words echoed in my mind, twisting through my thoughts like a malevolent thread I couldn't shake. I tried to go about my life, pretending that Sunny Hills Amusement Park, and everything we had faced there, was behind me. But deep down, I knew better. The park hadn't let us go. It had just paused, waiting. Dave and I stopped talking about what had happened, but we both felt it, the tension, the unease. We avoided mirrors as much as possible, and when I had to face one, I never lingered. There was always that creeping suspicion that if I looked too long, I wouldn't be alone. That something would look back at me with hollow eyes and a twisted grin. Months passed. The nightmares returned, slow at first, but more vivid than ever. The funhouse wasn't just a memory. It was a place I revisited every night. The mirrors, the carousel, the faces of my friends still twisted in agony, frozen in a world between life and death. The worst part was the constant sense that I was being watched, that somewhere, just beyond the edge of my vision, the creature still lurked. One night, it became too much. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. The nightmare had been worse than usual. Emily, Chris, Jordan, and Beth had screamed for help, their voices echoing in the funhouse until it felt like my head would explode. Their hollow eyes pleaded with me, accusing me for leaving them behind. But that wasn't the worst part. In the dream, Dave had been there too, sitting on one of the horses, his face twisted and merging with the grotesque carousel figures. His eyes, wide and lifeless, stared at me as his mouth moved, forming a silent scream. I couldn't shake the image as I lay there, the shadows in my room creeping closer, as if they had a life of their own. The funhouse was calling me back. I could feel its pull, stronger than ever. It wanted me to return. It wanted to finish what it had started. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking, and dialed Dave's number. It rang once, twice, then went straight to voicemail. Panic gripped my chest. Something wasn't right. I threw on my jacket and rushed out of the house, not even sure where I was going. I just knew I had to find Dave. His apartment was eerily quiet when I arrived. The lights were off, and there was no sign of him. I knocked, called his name, but there was no answer. My heart pounded as I tried the door. Unlocked. I stepped inside, my throat tightening with every creak of the floor beneath my feet. The air was thick, heavy with a sense of dread. I made my way through the apartment, calling for Dave, but the silence was suffocating. Then I saw it. In the middle of the living room, sitting on the coffee table, was a small, rusted ticket. Admit 1, the Forgotten Funhouse. And my blood ran cold. I stared at the ticket, my mind racing. This couldn't be happening. I had the only ticket, didn't I? I backed away from the table, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. And then, from the corner of the room, I saw movement. I turned slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. Dave was standing in the doorway to his bedroom, but something was wrong. His posture was stiff, unnatural. His eyes, oh God, his eyes, were hollow, empty, just like the others. And that grin, that horrible, wide grin stretched across his face, as though it didn't belong to him at all. Dave! I whispered, barely able to get the words out. But it wasn't Dave. Not anymore. He took a slow step toward me, and the shadows in the room seemed to shift, closing in, pressing against the walls. The same low whisper echoed in the back of my mind. We're still here. I stumbled back, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. The funhouse had taken him. Somehow, it had reached out from the park, through the nightmares, through the ticket. It had him now, just like it had the others. No, I breathed. No, this can't be real. We escaped. We're free. Dave's twisted form moved closer, his eyes locking onto mine with that dead, soulless stare. His grin never faltered. We were never free. A voice rasped from his throat, but it wasn't his voice. It was its voice. The thing that had haunted us, that had taken our friends, that had fed on our fear. I had to get out of there. I bolted for the door, my heart racing as I burst out of the apartment and into the night. The whispers followed me, growing louder, more insistent. I ran, not knowing where I was going, just needing to get as far away from the darkness as I could. But I knew, deep down, that there was no escape. Not really. For days I stayed away from mirrors, avoiding any reflective surface, terrified of what I might see looking back at me. But the feeling of being watched never left. It was always there, lurking just beyond the edge of my vision, waiting for the moment when I would slip, when I would glance into a mirror and see that wide, empty grin staring back at me. And then, one night, I couldn't avoid it any longer. I was washing my face in the bathroom when I made the mistake of looking up. At first, I saw myself, tired, hollow-eyed, and pale from weeks of sleepless nights. But then the reflection shifted. My features twisted, the familiar face staring back at me warping into something grotesque, something that wasn't me at all. It was there, the creature, the funhouse's twisted soul, grinning at me through the glass, its eyes hollow, its grin impossibly wide. And then it spoke, in that same whisper that had haunted me for so long. You can't leave. You belong to the funhouse now. The mirror rippled, and for a brief, terrifying moment I saw it, the funhouse, waiting for me, the carousel turning, the twisted figures of my friends still trapped in its eternal ride. The reflection grinned wider, its hollow eyes locking onto mine. We're still here, and now so are you. I wish I could say that was the end, that I fought it, that I escaped its grasp for good. But the truth is I didn't. I never really escaped the funhouse, that I can feel it even now, creeping closer, watching me from the corners of every room, every mirror, every shadow. It's only a matter of time before it takes me too, just like it took Dave, just like it took them all. So if you ever find yourself at Sunny Hills Amusement Park, if you ever hear the whisper of a carousel turning in the dead of night, or see a flicker of something unnatural in a funhouse mirror, run. Don't look back. Don't go inside. Because once you enter, once it sees you, it will never let you go. We're still here.